Let's start off with Anibal Sanchez in 2013, and excuse my Red Sox bias here, but he used to be a top prospect for the Red Sox, but he was included with Hanley Ramirez in the trade that had Josh Beckett and Mike Lowell coming back to Boston, and then down the road he got traded to the Tigers as they were making a push for the World Series in 2012, but 2013 was his best year yet, and you might have forgotten about it because he had a guy on the same team that won the Cy Young that year, Max Scherzer. Scherzer had a heck of a year, but Anibal Sanchez had an amazing season as well, but he came in 4th place in Cy Young voting. Taking a look at the numbers with Anibal Sanchez that year, he was 14-8, had an ERA of 2.57. That led the American League over 29 starts, but he had a FIP of 2.39, good amount of strikeouts per 9, 10 per 9, 2.7 walks per 9. The home runs, he was not letting the ball out of the yard at all that year. And if we take a look here at the numbers, him and Max Scherzer had the same Fangraph WAR that year. I think you could make an argument that Anibal Sanchez deserved the Cy Young over Max Scherzer. Scherzer did make a few more starts, had about right around 20 more innings than Anibal Sanchez, but Sanchez had the better ERA, he had the better FIP, so hey, amazing season from Anibal Sanchez. Anibal also had a game that season against the Braves where he struck out 17 batters. That's actually a Tigers record to this day. How about Travis Hafner in 2006? I remember a time when Hafner was one of the most feared hitters in the game, but he was overshadowed a lot in my opinion. But that 2006 season he had was absolutely bonkers. Look at these numbers. Hit 308, a 439 on base, a 659 slugging, an OPS of 1.097 that led the American League, 181 OPS plus, 42 homers, 117 RBIs, and this was only good enough for 8th place in MVP voting. That is just crazy to me. Now, when you go back to 2006, a lot of people were going back and forth between Justin Morneau, Derek Jeter, who should win the MVP. These two were on winning teams that year. They had good seasons. David Ortiz, he was in the conversation a little bit, set the franchise record in Red Sox history for most home runs in a single season. But the fact that Hafner finished 8th that year with these numbers, leading the American League in OPS, that is just crazy to me. And actually, when you go back from 2004 to 2006, Travis Hafner actually had the highest WRC plus during that span. He was the best offensive player in those 3 years. That's just crazy to think about. Also that season, Hafner hit 6 grand slams, which is tied with Don Mattingly for the most grand slams in a single season. Let's talk about Rich Aurilia in 2001. Now, when you think of 2001, especially the Giants, you think Barry Bonds, the 73 home runs, most home runs for a single season in Major League Baseball history, an incredible season. But I guarantee you, if you ask most baseball fans who was the next best player on the Giants that year, I bet money a lot of them would say Jeff Kent. But no, Rich Aurilia was the next best player for the Giants that year. This guy was so good in 2001. Look at these numbers. He hit 324 with a 369 on base, a 572 slugging, a 941 OPS overall, 37 home runs, 97 RBIs, played good in the field. I mean, this was a guy who was having just a great season that year for the Giants, but it was completely overshadowed by Barry Bonds. And actually, when you go back to the overall leaderboards on Fangraphs from 2001, Rich Aurilia was actually a top 10 player, but you just don't really remember him all that much because you had so much beef in baseball that year. Barry Bonds, obviously, you had Sammy Sosa, Giambi, Luis Gonzalez had a great year, but you had A-Rod as well. So yeah, Rich Aurilia, definitely, in my opinion, a forgotten player, and this was definitely a forgotten season. Let's go back to 2014 and talk about Jonathan Lucroy. Now, when you think about catchers around this time, you think Buster Posey, Russell Martin, but Jonathan Lucroy in 2014 was very good. Now, when you take a look at the offensive numbers, a very respectable season, but nothing off the charts by any means. He hit 301, a 373 on base, a 465 slugging, 13 homers, 69 RBIs. Again, very respectable, great numbers for a catcher, but nothing mind-blowing by any means. But when you look at the defensive numbers that he posted, he was so good that year. Now, take a look at these numbers here. He was the best defensive catcher in the National League, number 2 in Major League Baseball that year behind Mike Zunino, but he had 23 defensive runs saved. That was the most among catchers that year. And his framing was extremely solid, 18.2. That was good for 4th overall that year. And when you take a look at the overall leaderboards that year on Fangraphs, he had the third highest WAR, only behind Mike Trout and Buster Posey. So again, offensively, yeah, he was pretty solid, but when you combine the defensive numbers, this was an incredible season for Jonathan Lucroy. Up next, I got Zach Greinke in 2009. Now, I know a lot of people might remember this Cy Young season from Greinke in 09 when he was with the Royals, but I wonder if people remember how significant this season was in the history of the game. Look at these numbers. He went 16-8, a 2.16 ERA, a 2.33 FIP, ERA plus at a 2.05. He had 0.4 home runs per nine that year. He allowed 11 home runs all year in 229 and a third innings pitched over 33 starts. This was an incredible season. Absolutely deserved the Cy Young. And when you take a look at just the overall pitching seasons in Major League Baseball history on Fangraphs, it was 33rd all time in Fangraph WAR. I mean, this season was incredible from Greinke. Let's go back to 1996 and talk about Ken Caminiti. Now, I wonder how many people remember that Ken Caminiti won the MVP in the National League in 1996. I could totally understand if people don't remember that, because you had a lot of good players in the National League at this time. Barry Bonds was one of them, Mike Piazza, you had Gary Sheffield, you had Jeff Bagwell as well. So yeah, Ken Caminiti was one of those one-year wonders in 1996, but he put up a heck of a season that year. Hit 326, a 408 on base, a 621 slugging, an OPS of 1.028, 40 homers, 130 RBIs. Again, this season kind of just came out of nowhere, but yeah, it was more than enough to win the MVP. I just wonder how many people actually remember it. Excuse my giraffe neck Robbie here, but I gotta talk about John Valentin in 1995. Now, unless you're a Red Sox fan, there is no way you remember how good Valentin was in 95. You might also be asking, who the heck is John Valentin? Well, he was the shortstop before Nomar Garciaparra, but this guy was so good that season. Taking a look at the numbers, he hit 298, a 399 on base, a 533 slugging, a 931 OPS, 27 homers, 102 RBIs, 20 stolen bases as well. But it wasn't just a good season at the plate. This guy was phenomenal defensively, easily one of the best all-around players in baseball that year. Actually, when you take a look at the leaderboards that year, he had the highest Fangraph WAR when you combine the offense and the defense. He had a 30.4 defense that year. That is just incredible. It's not very often you see a player with at least a 30 offense and a 30 defense on Fangraphs. This was a great season from John Valentin. But like I said, Nomar ended up becoming the star, but just want to show some respect to John Valentin. That 95 season was great. Also, another fun fact, when you take a look at the top 200 seasons on Fangraphs since the live ball era, John Valentin ranks 184th. Just saying, it was that good of a year. Let's go back to 2004 and talk about Ben Sheets. Now, the season Sheets had in 2004, I think, was extremely overshadowed by a lot of storylines that year. Randy Johnson had a good season on the mound, also threw a perfect game that year. You had Roger Clemens with the Astros after coming over from the Yankees. He won the Cy Young that year, but Ben Sheets had a great season in 2004. Now, going back to that time, people were really looking at the wins and the losses. And when you take a look at the record he had, 12-14, a losing record. So people look at that and they were like, ugh, this guy stinks. I mean, my goodness, what kind of a picture is this? But when you look at the numbers that he posted, they were so good. Unfortunately, he was just on a bad Brewers team, but he had an ERA of 2.70, had a FIP of 2.65. He had 10 strikeouts per nine. Look at the walks per nine, 1.2 walks per nine, 0.9 home runs per nine, had an ERA plus of 162. This is a great season. I mean, 264 strikeouts and 237 innings pitched. He was a workhorse that year. Like I said, unfortunately, just got overshadowed that year. Randy Johnson did have the better season overall when you take a look at all of the numbers, but Ben Sheets had the second highest Fangraph WAR among pitchers that year, just very overshadowed. Roger Clemens had the 18-4 record. Clemens, that was a big story when he went over to the Astros that year. And, hey, it is what it is, but my goodness, Ben Sheets, unfortunately, injuries caught up to him later in his career, but this guy, when he was at the top of his game, he was great. Also that season, Sheets had a start against the Braves in which he struck out 18 batters, and he's one of only 20 pitchers all time to strike out 18 in a game. JD Drew was one of the most interesting players in my opinion, because this is a guy that I think most people will remember, but also a guy that didn't reach his full potential. Now, coming out of Florida State, going into the 1997 draft, scouts thought this is a player that's going to be one of the next best players in the game. He could hit for power, he could steal bases, he was great in the field. This is the next best player, but in the end, he got drafted by the Phillies, number 2 overall. However, him and Scott Boras said, we are not signing for anything less than a $10 million signing bonus. The Phillies still took him anyway, and he decided not to sign with the Phillies. He went and played a year of independent ball, went back into the draft, and got picked by the Cardinals in 1998. Had a few seasons with the Cardinals. He was kind of up and down with his injuries. You could definitely see the potential there. Just never fully lived up to the hype with the Cardinals. Ended up getting traded to the Braves, and that's how Adam Wainwright went back to the St. Louis Cardinals along with Jason Marquis and Ray King. And JD Drew in 2004 with the Braves, this guy put it together that year. He had a phenomenal season, hit 305, a 436 on base, a 569 slugging, an OPS of 1.006, 31 homers, 93 RBIs. He was really good in the field that year. Ended up signing with the Dodgers, went to my Red Sox later on, had a huge moment with the Red Sox in the playoffs in 2007. But yeah, JD Drew, I think people thought he was going to do more in his career, never fully lived up to that hype, but 2004 easily his best season. And last but not least, let's talk about John Olerud in 1993. I think when most people hear the name John Olerud, they go, oh yeah, that's the first baseman that wore the helmet in the field, but he was more than that. This is a great player. Actually, one of my favorite players of all time. I think he's extremely underrated. I think there is absolutely a case for him to be in the Hall of Fame because he was so good defensively, but he was also very consistent with the bat. He was an on-base machine, and he was on full display in 1993 when the Blue Jays won the World Series that year. Look at these numbers that he put up. That year, he hit 363. He had a 473 on base, a 599 slugging, an OPS of 1.072, 24 homers, 107 RBIs. Again, playing great defense at first base that year, helped the Blue Jays win that World Series. I mean, this was such a good season. I mean, an on base of 473? Are you kidding me? And this is only good enough for a third place finish in MVP voting. Frank Thomas won the award that year, but I definitely think John Olerud probably should have won the award that year. I'm just saying. And when you go back to the all-time seasons, going back to the beginning of the live ball era, John Olerud's 1993 season is 85th all-time when you look at the on-base percentage. That is just crazy. I love me some John Olerud. But let me know down below in the comments your thoughts. Let me know some other great seasons that you think have been forgotten about. I would love to read those all later. But everyone, that's all I got for right now. If you can, hit that like button on the way out. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll talk to you next time.